I think we're on time.
Yep, that's about the time you should start.
Alright, so I guess I'll just start by flicking this lever. Yes. So welcome to my panel called the Game Engine Thoughts, or Thaws, and a shameless plug that will come afterwards, I suppose. So, I'm not good at this, so you can expect some awkward and cringiness, like all BTMs, so I hope you're looking forward to that. I haven't prepared this panel much. I have a Google Doc that I've written a while ago, and I'm just gonna look over there for inspirations. So, game engine thoughts. As you all probably know, Minecraft is not a good base to make mods and content, and especially I would say creating mod packs, because if you want a really round experience, then you'll be sitting there for a couple of months and bugging mod authors and changing recipes and writing custom mods just to get everything working together the way you want. So I think we all know this. I'm just gonna throw out some ideas for what I think Game Engine should probably have, and perhaps you'll be inspired, especially looking at the modders here, if they would seek out something else after Minecraft, or already have been. So, there's a programming term called component-oriented design, or something like that, which is different from object-oriented design in that rather than having a hierarchy of objects, such as you have a base entity, then you have a hostile entity, and then you have a skeleton. I should shout? I can shout, I suppose.
Thank you.
I'll annoy everyone else who's in the con far away, though, so that's slightly problematic.
Yeah.
Hello, guys!
So well, why not listen to it, right? As you're doing other stuff.
Huh?
They can move into other buildings.
I suppose.
Just keep shouting, it's fine.
Yeah, Terrasology is gonna be cool too. Actually, no, Amadonis's panel is next, and after that is Terrasology, I believe. But yeah, the component-oriented design is basically has, well, I don't know if you can call it a flat hierarchy, but essentially you just have a basic entity, and however that's represented, and then you just add components to it, such as a physics component and an AI component. And is that an echo? I think I'm getting an echo here. Health and so on and so forth. You can probably imagine it. Like stuff like inventories could also be components. The problem with an object-oriented design, well, if you kind of know what you're doing, it can be pretty well, and you don't have to reuse a lot of the same code. Is once you've made the hostile entity that is a skeleton, and you want to make that skeleton non-hostile anymore, you run into problems. Now, this is a thing that could be avoided if you design your hierarchy well enough, but eventually you'll run into problems. One thought is, like, what if you designed an entity and now you want it to become instead a block entity, and you have to throw everything out of the window and start over again. So there's something called Entity Component System, short ECS. Sometimes it's called CES, and there's also other words, other terms for it. It's not standardized, there's lots of different ones. So supposedly Unity has an entity component system, but it's not really that great in my opinion. Entities are, in the ideal game engine that I'm thinking about, essentially just like a unique identifier. And they're not like an object or anything. They're cheap to copy, they're cheap to throw around your program, and you would be using data structures such as tables, hash tables, possibly lists to store data related to these entities, these components that you add to them, and the good thing about doing that is essentially instead of having pointers all around and the CPU is getting, you're gonna have to jump around in memory a lot, you can, if you go into the systems part of everything, I'm jumping back and forth here, I'm really sorry. You can essentially just iterate the table, which will be cached in memory, and then updating components will be really, really fast. This is like the good thing about ECS, and a lot of older games have been doing this. They've been storing entities and data representing entities in tables and lists and all that kind of stuff to get performance out of the game. Now that we have faster computers, we can just throw around pointers and jump around all in memory, which is nice, but everything gets slower as well, and you could be using that performance to do all that crazy stuff. Now, I have to admit, I've been trying to write my own game engine a couple of times, and I've started over again and again. It's, yeah, I've been getting stuck at various points trying to get it implemented in C#. I've tried out Nim as well. Java, unfortunately, is not really a possibility to implement this necessarily, because the JVM does not have structs. They are called in C#. Structs are essentially just simple data types that are, along with like numbers, integers rather, characters. What else is there? Bytes.
I don't know how soon. I don't think they are in Java 10.
Yeah, Java is very slow. Like, if you, and essentially, Java is not a perfect place to do game programming if you want it to be nice and performant, because while there is ways of doing pools and all that kind of stuff, it's not nice to program in as a game developer or as a mod developer, possibly, if you're trying to do mods. And there's various ways how you can implement that. I've already talked about storing components in tables, which could be done by a simple let's see. Well, you can essentially just group together components as a table row, and have the entity ID be the index of this table. Or you can use just a simple hash map where the entity ID is the key and the component is the value. So anyone who's doing programming might be able to do something with that. If you group components into a table, you can do stuff like getting related components together that are all required for rendering. So you can improve the rendering performance by just going through the table, doing some simple checks whether the entity is visible, and just throwing out the calls that are needed to render that entity on screen, I suppose. Perhaps any questions before I move on to some of the interesting things you can do with such a setup?
Honestly, just go on.
Silent. Best programming language. So I've explored Nim because it's kind of expandable in that you can write code that you would essentially just write the entity ID, I suppose, the variable that you store the entity ID in, and then you can use dot, and then you can say position, for example, and that would be able to be translated into this table lookup call or whatever you would do. So that would of course be the nicest. Then there's definitely other languages that you can do this in. Nim is still a little bit early on. It's just something I'm looking at.
Well, the best language depends on what specifically you're doing.
Of course, but we are talking about this entity component system design. And you can do stuff like just have simple C calls as well, but those end up looking not so nice. A good thing about having a language where you can write or can translate accessor syntax into arbitrary calls is that if you don't like the having the table be or the component be looked up through a table, but instead want to use a hash map or similar, then you can just change that call without changing the call syntax or changing the accessor syntax, I suppose. So programming language would definitely be something that is finding the right one is something that will be important for being able to write code that people can understand and easily adapt and modify for a modular game. Definitely something that this is very good, because like modularity kind of arises from the component design, because you could just say, okay, well, I have a creeper now, it has like explosion time components and such. I wanna give it a color, and now you can change the rendering thing, and you just add a color component of some sort, and instead of it being green, you can make it any color of the rainbow. Any other questions? Did I miss any? Tersology uses an entity ref wrapper around a primitive ID, then you can fetch components, etc. against the entity ref. Yes, that is that's something you can do in Java and C#. Twitch says, ask Copy about Python. Oh, sorry, I haven't ever used Python. Python for game programming, how good is it? Yeah, unfortunately, I've only looked in very few languages, and that's why I'm not the best person to talk to about specific implementation details or anything, but I hope I can get the idea out and maybe inspire some other people to have some more educated thoughts about this matter.
MCEdit is written in Python, I think, so seems like it can work, but I don't know any specifics either.
Yeah, the module design is very, very useful for just in general adding stuff to anything and replacing things. Such as if you were to decide, I don't like the physics that are currently in the game, you can take out the current physics and replace it easily without having to worry about every single class, every single thing breaking, every single mod. Of course there will be half of the classes.
Only half of the things that have special handling or so, which you probably don't have. Half of.
Damn, you're quiet.
Quite indeed. So one of the things that's also interesting that arises from this, I hope I haven't missed out any interesting questions. Entity ID key would be pretty terrible for memory users. Entity ID would probably be fairly large for a Minecraft world. I mean, Minecraft has a lot of other things on top of using entity IDs, so I don't know quite what you mean. I mean, the entity ID could be a simple integer. It's very, very small. It's probably be less memory intensive than any other implementation you could go for.
But with all the stuff that Minecraft has, how large would the integer have to be?
It depends. One of the problems with this design is, since you're storing stuff in tables and such, you'll have to keep track of which parts of the table are filled and which are empty. So you kind of have to do your own garbage collection of sorts. How many entities and how large the entity ID needs to be, it depends on the game. Obviously, some games could definitely be okay with a byte as an entity ID if you're doing stuff like
Like nothing.
Tetris and I don't know, Pong or something like that. And then of course you could use 2 bytes per entity ID. Minecraft would probably be fine with 4 million entities at a time in a game. You're definitely going to run out of memory before you hit the limit on that. The question on how to actually manage these tables and such is of course an open question. But they're smart people, so I think they'll figure it out somehow.
You could do it in pages, more or less.
Yeah, that would be the ideal thought. You'd group entities together, or like these tables together in pages, and then you'd have a page that is full and a page that is empty. And if one page is completely full, you can start using the next one, and entities will start being removed and deleted from the full pages. And when you start to look at okay, all the pages that I've used, or I need to get a new page, you can reuse one of the existing ones or whatever. It's a complicated thing. So to go into a slightly more interesting example, how would you represent a world in like a Minecraft world in this entity system, ideally? And you can essentially think of chunks as entities themselves, and these chunks could have components that are for storing block data. And the cool thing is, you'd be like, okay, well, let's store something like, you know, the block type. And what else is there? You would have a block type for air, a block type for stone, and such. You could have a block storage for light, for example. And you could add any arbitrary block storage that you'd want. You could add a pressure storage, like for liquids that are pressurized, flow, or basically if you wanted to make a interesting liquid system. You could also go away from the whole block type idea and go for something like a block shape and a block material. So you could just say, okay, this is a full shape and it's made out of wood. It's a full shape and it's a stair, and then you have probably either different shapes for different orientations of stairs, or you could have implemented by having another storage that would store the orientation in some kind. If you're going into let's see, what's next? I gotta look at my document here. Well, I guess block entities would be important as well. I've missed something in this. Terrasorology, we have a mix: primitive blocks, shorts and chunks arrays, plus entities for special blocks. Yeah, so block entities are, if you have a language that can support this fluently, it could be really, really cool, because you could translate these primitive getters and setters for the world interface, I suppose. You could just get into these block arrays, or these chunks, the block storage in the chunks directly, and modify and retrieve the component that you're trying to get. Essentially, these it would all be components, if that makes sense. So what I'm talking about here, the block ID, the block material, the block light, and all that kind of stuff could be components that are that you could theoretically use for entities as well, which comes into play when you're doing stuff like, okay, say you walk up to a stair and suddenly you want to pick up the stair, and the block that isn't stored in the world anymore, but is an actual entity that has all the same components that it had in the world, minus maybe a few things. And if you start adding arbitrary data to these chunks, you start creating block entities. So for example, you could walk up to a grass block and just say, hey, I'm gonna give this grass block a name, and you add a name component, and suddenly automatically you create a block entity that stores this additional data for you on that arbitrary grass block. And of course, that's a slightly silly example. So another example would be if you were to grow a tree, you could have at the bottom you could have a root block that would be a block entity, and all the other blocks, the entire tree, that could be grown over several stages instead of just popping into existence suddenly, which is kind of a weird thing. This block entity at the bottom could store stuff like the DNA of the tree, the growth stage, the amount it's fertilized, and thus how much it affects its growth speed and such. It could store data about the nutrients that are stored in the ground, which affects tree growth, for example. And all the other blocks would either refer to this block by its by special special ID, I suppose. A pointer. Yeah, a pointer would be pretty large for 64-bit. Yeah, it's kind of a pointer. Or you could just have a directional thing going. So when you have the trunk growing, each piece of the trunk would point essentially downwards into the one that is where it's grown from. So that would be probably a better way to do that. But a pointer either using the entity ID or a special version of that is smaller would be nice, I suppose. I think that's all I've written down in the design document. There's very interesting things you can start doing with that. I've got a game design document as well on some game ideas, such as if you started to make tools, you could just say, oh well, I have a tool that is an axe and it has this durability. You could decide, oh well, I want to add a weight system, and players can only pick up items up to a certain weight, and so you just can add a component that says how heavy an item is, and or alternatively, I suppose I haven't thought this one through, so I'll apologize for that. Probably ways to get component values, compute component values from other component values. So for example, the weight could be computed from the material and the size of the entity. That would be a very nice thing. Of course, how to implement it exactly is another question.
Well, you can cache the values until the next time it changes. Not sure how much overhead that would be in which implementation there.
Yeah, it's very unknown how that could all work out, how much memory footprint each implementation variant would have, and how performant it is. And well, ideally, a design like this would result in the game being very modular and being able to take out things and replace them without having to touch every single other thing. Salvatore was saying something about primitive blocks only use a single entity defining their type, saves on entity IDs, picking entities as needed, like if dropped. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I can suggest that if you're curious about how some of these concepts have worked out, we've been doing this for years, so if you're curious, just let us know. We have all kinds of talks, and we're happy to talk to others about it.
Yes. I'm slightly biased because I'm really not a fan of the limits of Java when it comes to game design. Terrasolidity is a game or game engine I've looked at before, and it's one that I couldn't get familiar with necessarily.
Yep, and that's
unfortunately.
That's completely legit and fine. The concepts remain the same though, so even if you're writing in a different language, we can all learn from each other in what approaches we figure out.
Indeed, that's true.
So So, which language will be your next attempt?
I have no idea, to be honest. I have next up is like me doing a shameless plug. Hopefully I have the time. Yeah, I should have the time. We're not over time or anything. Of an game I've been very interested in and I want to look at. Unfortunately, due to BTM, I didn't really have or couldn't be excused to really spend time and actually looking at it in detail. Now, something that's really cool about Terrasoology, of course, is that it's open source. This game that I'm gonna be showing you is unfortunately not, but it has a modding API, so that's cool. As for the actual question, I think Nim is still like a good candidate. It's a young programming language that is very expansive or expandable, I suppose, in terms of like the syntax you can use and you can change even. Macros and all that kind of fun stuff. It's a compiled language. It's type safe or statically typed rather. And well, the problem with that is due to it being young and probably not used that much. Sometimes you'll just have to jump into the IRC channel and figure out why this certain thing doesn't compile, and it turns out it's a compiler error or an issue in the compiler. That's always fun.
What's the name of that language again?
Nim.
N-I-M.
It used to be called Nimrod, and now they've changed it to be called Nim. Any other questions? Maybe from Twitch or so?
What about that shameless plug now?
Yeah, if there's no questions, I can move on. This is the part where we're gonna have an awkward silence. Thank you, everyone. I actually have pictures of these. It's like I've spent more time doing this shameless plug than actually talking about what was important to me. Although both of these are important to me, I guess. Vintage Story. It's a game that I've seen before, possibly on some subreddit or so, and I've looked at briefly. It was interesting, and I kind of like forgot about it, and then it appeared again, and it actually really raised my interest. So I'm going to tell you all about it. Here's some pretty pictures. So as you can see, it unlike some Minecraft clones, this actually has already a very neat looking and detailed and varied world generator, which is, I think, a very, very important thing in any Minecraft game. Now, if you've ever played Terraformacraft, it's currently very, very similar to Terraformacraft in that it's definitely a more survival-oriented gameplay style, where Minecraft is, well, I guess you could say it's more grindy. Essentially, it takes more time to get going, and I think, in my opinion, that's a good thing, because in Minecraft you end up keeping your worlds. At least a lot of us are playing our worlds for a couple of months. It's only I think rare that people have been keeping their worlds around for years and starting to add to them. Now here we can see some pumpkins growing in the wild as well.
That's totally melons, but okay.
Yeah, sure. Pumpkins could be green, right? Well, this image is called pumpkins, so these are pumpkins now. Here we have some wildlife. These are wild boars, I believe. So, no wait, the file is called pigs, so these are definitely pigs. Now, a lot of this stuff is still early in development, and they're continuously adding more features as time goes on and refining things. So, for example, the mob AI is very, very stupid right now. I've been playing the game for a little bit, and I had a pig get angry at me and basically never leave me alone while leaving its like offspring behind. So, and the pathfinding is also essentially non-existent. If you can remember the non-existent pathfinding in Minecraft, then essentially the same as a wolf.
Nice clouds.
Yeah, the clouds are really nice. They're still blocky, but they're both transparent and they vary in height. So you can imagine possibly like a weather system is going to be added at some point where you have localized clouds and localized rain. There's a little farm. And you can see the GUI here. Now, I'm not a fan of GUIs necessarily, and inventories and all that kind of stuff. So maybe I can mod this away and have like just 2 hands and, you know, backpack or barrel that will be equipped. I'm just noticing people are saying stuff in chat. Unfortunately, because I have to access the screen, I can see that at the moment. So I'll come back to these things later.
Someone asked for integrated Weiler? That seemed like Weiler.
Yes. It shows you information about stuff like the growth stage. If you look at these crops, for example, the names of things, temperature, and all kinds of stuff. It's actually something I wanted to mention. There's just more farms. This was one of the pictures that I got from the developers because I couldn't be asked to actually open up the game and take them myself. I probably wouldn't have had the time for that. Here's a campfire, for example, and you can see on the right the interface. You can actually open multiple interfaces at once. Well, more or less. Essentially, you can open your inventory and close it at the same time as you see this this campfire, and maybe eventually we can have multiple inventories open at once and just move them between. I don't know. Perhaps that's a planned feature. The way you place these campfires, by the way, is by getting some grass, placing down a little pile of straw, and then putting logs on top of it, and then it sets on fire automatically. Here we have a demonstration of multiplayer, so of course this game is multiplayer compatible. It would be a Minecraft clone without multiplayer, and the animation's still a bit derpy. I just essentially wiggling around their arms and legs, but that's gonna be improved soon. So here we can see napping in action. So essentially you're picking up flint. Hopefully we'll be able to make stone tools at some point too, because flint is kind of rare. And you get this grid interface where you have to cut out pieces of this grid to make a certain shape.
Did you update the picture? Because I'm not seeing what you are saying.
The napping? Well, I didn't have a picture of the nap of showing the napping itself, but you can see the 2 stones on the ground.
I see, yeah. I'll get it.
So, next up, there's clay molds, and essentially you can heat up the ores that you find on the ground and underground, melt them up into fluids, and then pour them out into these molds, and you have a pickaxe mold. I believe that's an axe mold and a hammer mold, and a couple of ingot molds that are filled up with different kinds of metal and alloys. So there's copper, I believe, black bronze, and possibly bronze? Tin bronze, I believe that's called in the game. And something really cool that I can't easily show is the game has bloom, and basically just it looks really, really cool if the metal is hot and it actually glows and it's bright gold and all kinds of stuff. The whole clay casting and annealing system looks and feels quite amazing, and it's quite nice. Here's some forges as well. Essentially, you just throw charcoal in there, make the charcoal pits very similar in as you do in Terraformcraft, by the way, if you've played that. And also you can see the anvil in action here. And here's an actual, inside of a building. Unfortunately, you couldn't show any of the building necessarily. We have a bloomery, and behind we have a tool rack with some tools on the side, 2 forges that are heating up metal. There's a crucible next to the anvil as well, so that's the thing that you put in the campfire. They're going to be adding a model that shows the crucible actually being visible in the campfire. Right now it's just just an item that you can put into the fire interface, and then you add some ores to it. We have in the back an anvil mold that you can fill with molten liquid, and it hardens and you get the anvil. And then you can see this is actually an ingot that was placed on the anvil and then stretched out to make a specific form. This is, I believe, I'm pretty sure this is almost going to be a sword. A couple of ingots on the ground and such and so forth. And I think that's all I have. So this game, I have not been able to check out the modding, but all the game content that you've seen that the developers are putting in is actually made with the modding API. So unlike Mojang, which just, you know, is straight up hard coding almost everything, these guys are actually putting effort into making an API that both they use personally and everyone else can use to create their mods. Maybe I should have asked if you had any questions about the game before I started on the modding. So maybe if you have any questions about the game, I hopefully can answer, possibly. Is it international? I don't know why it wouldn't be. How we can get it. The game is currently in early access. It's not on Steam yet. It's probably something that I want to do. It's at vintagestory.at. I'm gonna put it into the chat as well. And it's actually out for just €8 right now, so that's something you don't see these days, that you get a early access game that's actually, you know, sort of, it's as cheap or even cheaper than Minecraft used to be, so. So that was one of the things where I'm like, well, you know, like early access game for €20 that I might be interested in modding. I might look at it later, you know. But this both piqued my interest due to being very similar to the gameplay that I like, which is Terraformacraft. I've been playing Terraformapunk for quite a while on 1.7.10. Still to this day, I suppose. It has international. It's it's too confusing. No international travel, I'm sorry. At least not yet. We could mod planes in there if you wanted to.
I'm currently looking at the wiki, and all I see is they use all kinds of JSON for everything.
Yes, so the assets use not entirely JSON. I think it's some version of human readable JSON where you don't have to put quotation marks around the keys, but essentially yes, it's JSON.
So, but I don't see any notion of what code is being used or which language.
Well, there's actually two DLLs inside the mod folder, which is their content. There's a one for creative mode, I believe, or the creative tools, and one for survival. So I haven't been able to check it out yet. The game is written in C#. It's a game engine from scratch. I believe it has something to do with Manic Digger, but I'm not quite sure. And well, the plugins are also written in C# or the bots or whatever. It's written in C# with one of the, not the .NET Core stuff, but like .NET 4, and they definitely are looking to make it work with Mono, and it has been, I believe. It's using OpenTK as part of the rendering and audio and game controls and all that kind of stuff. So OpenGL. Yeah, cross-platform compatibility is something they wanna keep, and they hopefully already have. looking at the features list as well at the moment. Maybe I'm seeing something interesting.
OpenGL, that was already answered. Well, in my opinion, they should just port it from .NET 4 to .NET Core, but I guess it's too complex for that to make it easy.
Yeah, some of the like OpenTK, I believe, hasn't been released for .NET Core yet. There's always considerations, but it could be a possibility. Yeah.
Also, .NET Core isn't. It's at this point a moving target. They're consistently changing things. So there was a .NET Core 1 and now there's a .NET Core 2. And they did a lot of stuff in .NET Core 1 that they completely ripped out because it either didn't work correctly or they just decided on a whim, hey, we're going to change everything back or to something different. So yeah, it is nowhere near stable at this point, as much as I'd love for it to be.
Yes. Although I do have to say I like that. It's better than having a ton of old stuff that doesn't really work too well and trying to support it. So I do respect that, I suppose.
Well, let's see if .NET 4 is finally stable then in a few years.
Well, Mono has been around for a long time, and there's been games that were using hello. There's been games that were using let's see, what's it called? XNA, or rather Mono Game, which is the Mono equivalent. Those have been running on like Xbox and all kinds of stuff until Microsoft stopped supporting XNA, and now we only have Mono Game, I suppose. They have some nice shaders. I don't know exactly how moddable they are. I would suppose they are very moddable.
I have seen mentions of you writing
Yeah.
shaders or adding shaders in your mods. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think you can do shaders.
And by default, they said there was Bloom, which makes things glow really nice. You can turn on God Rays as well. Yeah, the game runs pretty smooth for me, I have to say as well. So that's a good thing. Where Terrasology, unfortunately, it kind of I hope it's improved over time. Gotta poke some fun at Terrasology, but we have a competitor here.
Could you put a URL in the chat? I missed what you said before.
That's the URL.
Thanks.
And like I said, I haven't had the chance to even get through all the game content that they have, which is not much, so I'm not missing out that much. But like especially the modding, I would have loved to be able to talk more about that. But I'm gonna check that out after BCM most likely. And I encourage you to do that as well. The more options we have for continuing, our content creation. If it is a Terrasology, or if it's a vintage story, or I don't know, Mind Test, which I don't think anyone has picked up. People probably have. Never mind.
Yeah, there has been people working on Mind Test. Mainly the Lua people, I guess.
But even if you've been checking out Terraformacraft, for example, and you just want to have a game that is similar and have something to look forward to, then this is just fine as well. I think that's my last panel here, almost. Well, those are questions. I was supposed to be talking about modding. Oh, whoops. I suppose Twitch chat doesn't have any questions either.
Does it have backpacks?
Not yet. I'm gonna. So one funny thing is, I suppose I could talk about this. Like, I've been talking to the developers, and they're currently they don't seem to have that many players because it feels very similar to how Minecraft used to be back in the really really old days, where Notch essentially joined the IRC channel and you could basically talk to them. There's a Discord community which they are running, and you get to talk to the developers and throw around ideas. And there's a lot of things that I could have already said that they're curious about changing and implementing all kinds of stuff, and there has been feedback before as well that has been implemented, which is really, really cool. And so yeah, backpacks, there are backpacks in there right now, but I've noticed there are essentially 4 slots for increasing your inventory size, so there's not a static inventory, which is a good thing, you know, because mods might want to play around with that. And I have suggested to implement backpacks in a similar way to variable backpacks, and instead reserve those slots for pouches that could be specialized to carry, you know, only ores or only flowers and stuff. They want to do something similar to World of Warcraft, where you have those, and then to carry on more things, you would, you know, pick up the thing and stuff.
Backpacks.
Yeah, similar to that. But I just want, you know, backpacks have to work a certain way. You have to place them down, and you have to pick them in, and they have to go to your back. That's just the only way that they can work. Just carrying multiple backpacks is quite a silly idea.
Can you carry backpacks?
Maybe.
Only with smaller backpacks.
The way it works right now is that any of those, you know, inventories that increase your inventory size, they cannot be in your, you cannot carry them while they are not empty.
Fair enough.
Yeah, there's a wiki. Thank you, Nikki. I believe people are starting to work on it. There's a lot of stuff that is currently changing, so it's kind of silly to be putting a lot of effort into the wiki. They have a crafting system, a 3x3 crafting thing, but I hope that'll go away with time. There's a lot of in-world crafting, like you saw the napping, placing down blocks, the placing ingots in the forge is all, you know, there's no inventory, you just hold the ingot and place it down.
So there's more like a slot for item type.
I don't know what you mean.
Well, it's not like you open a GUI and click the item into an inventory of size 1.
Yes.
So you rather right-click it with the item and
Yeah.
it pops in there.
And I hope the game evolves to be more, if not all, you know, in-world interactions, because those are always way more fun and way more immersive, and such. And I hope that either through mods or either in the base game, we'll see ways to automate things that don't involve doing things the manual, painful, hard way, that also don't have inventories. I'm really hoping. That's my personal view, though. And that's a cool thing. You could theoretically just make a Minecraft clone inside Winter's Story using the modding API.
Or clones of the most important mods like Charset and stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, I suppose that will be it then.
I can only hang for a little bit, so then I've got work, so I'll might drop in whatever I'm starting up the game. But yeah, what is this talk?
This was my game engine thoughts and the Shameless plug that turned out to be Vintage Story.
I would love to hear more about it. Just if you've got any links or anything, flag me my way. I'll check it out.
Sorry, I couldn't understand the last sentence.
If you've got any links or anything, any info, just flick it my way. I'll check it out.
Will do.
Yeah, once you're in game, oh well, no, you cannot see backlog. I will send you some links.
I'm
Thanks,
on
Nikki.
You can see me some there.
My issue with in-world crafting is it can be really bad for TPS.
How so?
Yeah.
If you're trying to automate in-world crafting, you are consistently having block updates. That's one of the issues with it.
Like having to visually update the block, you mean?
If you try and automate an in-world crafting, you will lag the server.
Ah, yeah. Well, the idea would probably be to have different ways of having the automated crafting be done rather than using the same exact process that you do. For example, if you wanted to automate placing a campfire, that would be kind of silly, I suppose.
Yeah, I think one way to speed things up, I guess, is if you've got like say a crafting table, you can basically cache the result of what should be there and then only actually place it when you need to.
Yeah, there's a lot of expensive things, as well as block updates and, like, for example, block updates. If you know that updating the whatever invoke crafting thing you've automated should not affect any nearby blocks, you could just say, well, we don't need the block update, I suppose. Or in terms of FPS, I mean, if the game was not written by people who don't know much about how to write performant games, then I guess it could run decently well with lots of chunk updates. But that is client side. We're talking about TPS here.
What is the cool? Sorry. What's the vintage story coded in, by the way?
C#. All
right.
It's using OpenTK for display, audio, keyboard input, and window creation and such.
All right.
As far as I know, anyway. They might be using something else for a specific task. So yeah, cool. Thanks for joining the panel. I hope it wasn't too awkward.
It was okay.
It was.
And yeah, I hope you're gonna. Well, the problem is I've been talking about vintage